But Aslan is about the business of the Emperor of the Sea, about the business of his father, and he brings the children in to be about the business of Aslan, bringing life back to a dead land and demonstrating his own piety and giving of himself in love for others. I mean, it's the Christ story.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Settling in.
Well, okay, I will remain immobile for the rest of the show.
I didn't know if you wanted to say something. Okay. I just drooled on myself. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Aboud, and I am here with Paul, Martin, and returning guest, Mr. Ian Galloway. Ian, glad to have you back.
Thank you. Yeah, glad to be back.
Yeah, we just had you on a couple episodes ago for a literature theme. I think we talked about sacrificial friendship.
Yeah.
And you shared about Anne of Green Gables.
Yeah. Yeah. Still cry about it.
Yes. Ian is here at Memoria Press. He serves as our director of print productions. Although, right. Ian, you do so many things. You work on our Greek curriculum. You edit and help with some of that. And I think, and Novel Thoughts, the podcast, which is excellent. So Ian's busy around the office.
Yeah, we do a lot around here. I'm not the only one who does a lot. We wear a lot of hats.
Today, we are going to, as usual, cover what we're reading and answer a listener question that we are excited to answer because we don't get it very often. And then we're going back to the literary theme, but this week we're going to cover piety. And it's a theme that I think we probably don't often discuss, and maybe it's a little misunderstood. So I'm excited I know I'm going to learn something.
I hope we all learn something.
Okay. Oh, well, what are we reading, gentlemen?
I always forget that we're going to be asked that question. A question we are asked.
It shouldn't be a hard question for you, Martin.
I did restart. Not restart. I continue reading Henry James' Portrait of a Lady, and I was scared because in that book, I was only about a third of the way through, and somebody told me that they just really did not like the decision that the female protagonist makes. And I'm thinking, oh no, I that's not something I can look forward to. So I kind of set it aside. You know how you do that with books. And then I picked it up again, and it doesn't matter. It's Henry James, and he's such a good writer that, I see where it's going. Some of it's already happened, but I'm following through on it and enjoying even though, there's a lot of books that have bad stuff in them, bad things happen to people and bad things happen to good people in particular. And yet you still read. Why do we read stuff like that? Why do we read sad stories? But there is something cathartic about that. So,
I mean, on that note, you gave me a very twisted story. I just finished The Flaming Forest.
Oh,
very twisted. Lady pretending to be her brother's wife in order to, keep the police in the dark. It was just a very interesting read, but it was supposed to be my bedtime read, and because
did you enjoy reading it?
Some fun adventure novel.
Yeah.
And in fact, yesterday when I was like, I've got time, I've actually got the mental energy to be reading The Name of the Rose, but I was like, I want to finish this book. So I finished The Flaming Forest yesterday.
You say twisted, you mean illicit in some way? Or?
No, just
topsy-turvy.
Yes, and people
faking you out at
people lying and people, playing other games. But, in the end, it was because, the main question being wrestled with there is the law's justice always just? And sort of this family kind of allowing this police officer to get close, but keeping him in the dark so that they have a chance to explain to him really who the guy is that he's after.
The Flaming Forest by James Oliver Curwood.
Curwood? Is that right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, I read the book. It's done. Now I got to go find something else to read at nights because when I have no mental energy, when I'm going to bed.
And not Echo.
That was
Can't do
Echo.
that.
Echo is... Now, I could read Echo going to bed because I just could get into the story, but he's got so many little fun things for a philosophical mind to grab that I want to read it when I'm fully cognizant of able to grab that stuff.
That makes sense.
Yeah, which is why I've only read about one page of The Name of the Rose at the moment. So I think I said I'm reading that last time, but really I've like read 2 or 3 pages actually. I need to get into it. So
Yeah, you
it's
get
next.
into it. And
It's totally me. It's not the book itself. I've just wanted to go do other
well,
things.
what else have you been reading?
Well, I did read a fantasy novel, which was called Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. Several people asked, and it was great. I enjoyed it. Interesting, feels, anyway, we could go talk about it for a long time because it's definitely a middle piece in an ongoing saga and it feels that way a little bit, but we'll see what happens in the long run. And so I've tried to do The Name of the Rose, also reading basic economics just for fun.
Really?
And that is fun. It's very clear, very easy to understand, clear-headed.
There's a particular
Thomas Sowell.
Like Soul,
yeah,
the Soul
yeah.
book?
Mhm.
Oh.
So
He's a good writer.
I've not really been reading as much literature of late, just to be frank. I've been doing more outdoor activities, which have been fun.
Turn of the season.
Turn of the
So,
season,
yeah.
getting outside,
Yeah.
just enjoying nature.
Can we, before we move on to the listener question, can I say a couple things?
Oh, Paul, yes. Is this going to be an editorial note
This is an editorial
from Paul?
note
Yes.
that apparently when we did the last literary episode on sacrificial friendship, I think, I don't know if that was like the day after I got back from Italy. I don't know.
I think it was.
But I was totally not
You made some mistakes.
multiples. Somebody pointed out that I said Antigone doesn't die. Antigone does in fact die in the play. And I think somebody else said I mentioned reading a fantasy novel and I didn't say what it was. And I don't recall ever reading a fantasy novel.
That
Was
was
it
me.
Ian's? Was
recently?
it Ian's?
That was
though?
me.
Oh, it was you.
That was
Yeah.
me.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank God it wasn't me.
You were-
Okay, I just want to say that whatever I said in that episode, it probably sounds wonderful, but I apologize if there's any inconsistencies, incorrectness, untruth, falsities.
We've got it.
I'm sorry,
We've
I
all been
didn't know
there.
that. I would have pointed it out on the air.
You didn't show up for that episode.
Oh, well,
Because
Which
you
is-
never miss an opportunity to.
no.
Which is probably why I shouldn't have been on the episode,
Mm.
is because I was my mind was still jumbled from flying across the ocean.
Mm.
On gelato.
That too, but also just on sleep.
Mhm.
Oh, well, thank you, Paul. Antigone, now we know.
She dies. Yes,
Spoiler.
Don't need to read it now.
but I think my point there was that I was making the point that like pagan literature versus Christian literature,
Yeah.
and I said that's why they can't die is because they don't have hope after death.
Yeah.
But I think my point still stands. She dies in despair. I mean, it's very clear. It's not a sacrificial death.
Yeah.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
but I knew she died. I like walked into the episode knowing she died, and somehow something else came out.
We've all been there.
Yeah, those intervening false thoughts that just insert themselves in between you and the audience
And reality.
the truth. Yeah.
That's funny. Well, speaking of the truth, maybe we can add some truth to this listener question. We got an excellent question in our email inbox from Mandy. I'm going to read it and then toss it out to the group to give her some advice. Mandy says, I have a 12 and 14-year-old daughters who are about halfway through first form Latin. I'm studying it too. I'm about halfway through second form. I've been reading Climbing Parnassus and have been convinced that learning classical languages is well worth the effort, but I'm not sure how far my girls will actually go before graduating since they have a lot of other school requirements with our homeschool co-op. If they only complete second or third forms, is it worth it to spend the time on Latin, or should we transition to Spanish? I was a Spanish major and know enough to get them a good Spanish foundation, though not enough to make them fluent. So I'm not sure if it would be better to continue with Latin or just let them study the grammar of modern language with the same aim. Thanks for the help. Wonderful question.
It is great. It's a great question. I mean, I would say stick with the Latin because, for one, the inflection that happens in Latin is going to force the students to understand grammar more deeply than Spanish is, because Spanish is only inflected in the verbs and not in the nouns. And fluency, in my experience, I mean, I picked up multiple modern languages by immersing myself as a young adult in those cultures, and having the Latin background, it made it so that within first modern language, it took 3 months or so. I picked up another one concurrently in that same community that wasn't the language we spoke, just because there were a lot of other people that spoke that language, which took longer. And then the third modern language I acquired, it took me like 2 weeks to become conversant. And so from going from nothing to being conversant. And I attribute all of that to my mastery of grammar from Latin being an inflected language. And so, I mean, it'd be great if you could do both alongside, but I would advocate go through the Latin grammar as far as you possibly can, because that's going to give them the tools they need for whatever language they want later on.
Which can be picked up after high school, certainly.
Absolutely.
College, you can study abroad, you can travel, you can live somewhere new, pick up languages. Yeah.
I took Spanish in the 2nd grade, the 4th grade, the 6th grade, and 2 years in high school. And so now I know how to say Susana, está Susana en casa.
It sounds like you don't know.
And that's about it. Okay, so I look back and I think all that time spent on Spanish in a classroom, not in a community like Paul did, was a complete and utter waste of time. And then I learned through teaching it Latin, and that is far more useful than any Spanish I ever took. For one reason, because now I know grammar. Spanish is got a lot of irregularities in it, but Latin is very structured, and so you can see the grammar very clearly in it. And I'm having to revitalize my Latin now, reading the gospel readings every day, and I'm really enjoying that, and I have a very low level reading knowledge of it. But if you're gonna speak, if you want to get fluent, you want to speak a foreign language, you better have a community in which you're doing it. And having the Latin, there's so much of Spanish is Latin. I can read some Spanish signs on stores because I know Latin. So in a sense, learning Latin is also going to help you in Spanish if you ever go and learn it. So,
right. And the question is, what's your long-term goal? Right. And in a sense, she's only got a short-term goal because she's only got, 4 to 6 years left. Right. But long-term, what do you want to set your kids up for life, as opposed to what do you want them, what are you trying to get them done in just these 4 years? And so I would advocate that you can, in the time she has, she could get through all 4 forms, but it would depend on how much time she dedicates every day to it.
And I told this anecdote on the show before, I think it's been a while, but I had a friend who was an airline pilot, and he had a stewardess on his plane who could speak any language to anybody on the plane. And she knew 8 or 9 languages. And he asked her one day, how do you know all those languages? And her answer was, because I studied Latin in school. Do you have Spanish opinions? No opinions in Spanish.
Well, see, the thing is I hear this question some because I also deal with our customers quite a bit, and I don't know Latin, but I know Greek and I know Hebrew, and I took those in seminary. I took them throughout college and other times. But one of the things that I always come back to, just anecdotally, as I talk about myself to people, is that learning those languages, Hebrew was fascinating because it was such a different language to English, and in the way that Hebrew definitely has a difficult verbal system, but its noun, its noun and adjective system is not that hard. Then you get to Greek, and it's got an inflected noun and verb system, and the verb, especially what's called voice, is pretty different in Greek even than in Latin, and that can be difficult for an English speaker to take on, but it's in the rigor of that taking on that you really, we've already said it, I'm beating a dead horse here, but you learn grammar. There was so much about English grammar I had forgotten by the time I got to college,
or had
never fully grasped. Right. By the time I got to college and seminary, that the acquisition of a classical language in Greek, and then a different language in Hebrew, that forced me to think differently about languages and how they communicate, really solidified concepts in English and what English is doing to me better than just the study of English itself.
Well, and not just facilitating your thinking about language differently, but facilitating thinking differently.
Absolutely, that's right.
You can see that with the Latin. There's things, they say things there in a completely different way.
That's right,
and it's because they really kind of think in a different way.
Mm.
That's right.
Well, thank you. We hope, Mandy, that was helpful to you. And anyone else that wants to ask us a question, you can email podcast@memoriapress.com. We have a lot of questions in the inbox, so we welcome more. And today's topic, the literary theme of piety. We're going to talk about how it plays out in the books we read and teach. And I was thinking about it, and I wonder if piety sounds maybe old-fashioned or kind of obscure to modern ears. But as we dig in, I think we'll find that it's quite radical. So I want to know from each of you, how would you define piety so that we're all on the same page?
I will give
because I asked this before we started recording, and I was a little surprised.
The definition that I memorized in 8th grade, which has always stuck with me, which I believe comes from Thomas Aquinas, is piety is giving to God his due. It is a sort of a sub virtue of justice, and justice demands that we give to the other his due, and piety is specifically justice as applied to the divine, man's relationship to the divine.
I disagree.
I think I need a little more than that, Martin.
No, I read Aquinas before the show, just in preparation for it, and he's talking about the obedience to God is one aspect of it, but it's also the implication of that to your treatment of your fellow human beings.
So you had to apply
it's a balance between those two. Because it comes originally from the Nicomachean ethics.
Well, it's coming, but again, it's a sub virtue of justice, right?
But
are you isolating it to the relationship between man and God alone, or man to man as well? Which is what I think.
I'm saying justice demands giving to all their due, and I'm saying that when we use the term piety, we are, again, under the umbrella of justice, specifically talking about our relationship to the divine. Not man to man, because that's in the category of, that's in justice, right? Like justice is man to man, right? Which then gets elevated by charity and all that other good stuff.
So you're saying it's a part of justice, but it's not a part of piety per se.
Piety per se is not, I would say, does not have a link to fellow man other than the fact that giving God his due based on what he's commanded to us to do.
Connection to the way we treat each other.
Well, I think Aristotle would disagree with that. I think in the Nicomachean ethics, he considers it a balance between those two things.
That justice and piety are kind of...
That piety towards God and piety towards your fellow man, they're connected very closely, but they're... you can go too far in either direction and get away from piety.
What's your definition of piety towards your fellow man?
Treating him well.
Isn't that just justice?
Well, that's justice too. But I mean, I think Aquinas considers, and I think Aristotle too, considers piety a precondition of virtue. And I don't know what implications that has for what you're saying. But I think because the Romans in particular, who piety was a very important characteristic for the Romans, and it was related in, as I understand it, to order, because they were all about order and piety. Piety is the order of the soul. And in that ordering, I think that the sense I get is that piety is an ordered way of dealing with both God and man. And again, they're related to each other. There's implications going both ways, but there's an order that you have to observe, because you can become too heavenly minded to be any earthly good, or you can be so concerned with your fellow man and too concerned for him and not enough for God. And there's a balance in there somewhere. I think that Aquinas seems to want to strike, and I know Aristotle does too.
But specifically in the realm of piety, not justice, generally speaking.
Yeah, I haven't thought about piety's relation to justice per se.
Yeah, because my understanding of it is the balance is is demanded by justice. But the reason the reason we use piety specifically today in like a solely religious context is because it was particularly driven towards justice in your relationship to the divine.
Well, and see, that's where I was wondering if there was a distinction that Aquinas, as a Christian philosopher, is making, because to Martin's point, you have Aeneas. He's pious Aeneas.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that piety is in his filial relationship to his father and taking on his father and saving him from Troy and so on.
I mean,
and so I don't have the answer. I don't know, but I do wonder if the distinction here is one of, if it's an English and a Christian distinction that we're trying to make, that at some point in the past has divorced itself from that, because other cultures have filial piety. You know, like Asian Chinese cultures have a very great honor that's being shown to the family and to the parent. And to what extent is that piety as we understand it?
Yeah, and we were in Rome recently, and at the Galleria Borghese, where we saw this Bernini statue of Aeneas fleeing Troy with his father on his back and his son behind him, and that's not only the statue but the event itself has always been considered in stone a picture of Roman piety.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but also in that statue specifically, Bernini has Aeneas. And I can't remember if it's Aeneas holding it or his father's carrying the penitents, right?
Yes.
Like they're carrying the household gods.
Yes.
And this like.
But those two things are related.
They're related. They go to, right.
Connected.
Like, and that's where I've always seen this idea of filial piety as an outworking specifically of religious piety, right?
But as Ian pointed out, you can have that without that, right?
You can have filial piety without religious piety.
Yeah.
Yes,
and it seems to me Bernini's statue does have that balance in there because of your point about what his father's carrying. You know I'm right.
That's how you win an argument.
I think that there are issues. However, now I'm going to have to go. I mean, now granted, I started this episode saying I, was wrong on the last one. So I have to go look, but I see that, but because
isn't the view that it's solely directed towards God, piety, isn't that kind of an outgrowth of pietism, which is a sort of isn't it what that is?
I mean, yes, if you took piety outside of the umbrella of justice, then yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And what I'm arguing for is that piety is a way of being a subcategory of justice, is a way of talking about a particular thing, right? A particular form of justice, rather than just a generic, right? Justice is giving to the other what they are owed, and saying, well, that other in piety
is God,
is specifically God. But I mean, your point about filial piety does ring a good bell. So,
so it could have a horizontal line and a vertical line, right? Piety.
It could.
Well, and part of that, and I think this is Aquinas, but I'm not sure. It's some balance in between. You can't worship your father, and you can't neglect your father. That's I think an example,
right? An example of filial piety. Sure,
yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So does it have connotations of duty and fidelity?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean,
devotion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
devotion's a good word, especially if you think about what you're giving to God and what you're giving to an obligation that's more.
Well, yeah, I don't know that I like this idea of horizontal.
Okay.
Right?
Paul still doesn't like it. Okay.
Because we're only talking about. We're not talking about. I have no piety towards Ian. Mm-hmm. Right. We are both fellow men. There's no piety in our relationship. There's justice. Mm-hmm. The piety that I have for my father is still a vertical. Mm-hmm. Right. you have a piety because this person is above you.
Okay.
Not the person
Lateral.
that is so piety would have to include some form of hierarchy.
Okay.
And that's where I think that whole concept of order, it's virtue ordered rightly toward God and your fellow man, and that the fellow man aspect of that too. I mean, it's been frequently, piety's been frequently, certainly in Rome, been connected with God, country, and family. You know, so it's not just your father or your family; it's society as well.
Yes, but also that's still a vertical relationship.
Yes, yeah, I'm not contesting that. Yeah.
And piety shows itself at the heart of a lot of the works that we've been talking about. So maybe it would help us to understand it. Do you have a couple examples from, it can be books from our catalog or something outside of that? Maybe, I know you
Well, the
mentioned,
Aeneid,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
Virgil.
I mean, I think the Aeneid sticks out precisely because he's called Pious Aeneas.
Yes.
Like, I don't know
But
how
I think
many
he's also
bajillion times in the
right,
text.
right. But he is. I mean, you know, you have the scene between Aeneas and, I mean, the tragedy of Dido and Aeneas is that Aeneas chooses to be faithful to the god's commands. You know, and he's devoted to that
Right.
to the expense of another human being. And of course, he's not entirely in control of what she does, but
Who he's
There-
having an illicit relationship.
that's right. That's right. I think beyond one of the first examples that came to mind when I was thinking about piety was our King Arthur book, our tales in the King Arthur book, particularly of Lancelot and Guinevere, and the fact that their relationship is impious, and the fact that it is not only disordered, but in their relationship to God, but also into their king, their sovereign, King Arthur, and because of that impiety, he is unable to fulfill the greatest quest that he, you know, is given to another. The quest in the end is given to another. And in fact, it's his son, right? It's his son that goes and anyway, I
can't
can't
help you
recall all of the details, but I'm sure there's something
You'll
there.
be asking forgiveness.
That's right. That's right. What is it? Is it Gala? I think it's Gala. Anyway, I think it is his son who is pious, who in fact achieves the quest of the Grail. I think. Quote me if I'm wrong. Don't quote me if I'm wrong. But those are some of the.
We'll give an
examples.
update on this on the next show.
I wanted to bring up Robin Hood,
Ooh.
and I'm not, and I because this could be contentious, right? But is Robin Hood fundamentally a work about piety? Because it could be read as revolting against tyranny in service of the divine laws of what it means to be a human person, right?
Yeah, I'd vote for that.
I think as red-blooded Americans over here,
Yes.
we're all on board with that.
But I mean, you can. I've also argued in the past that you do have to wrestle with the fact that at first glance, what we all remember Robin Hood for is stealing from the rich
That's
to give to
right.
the poor, right? And that formulation is very much an end justifying the means, right? Our end is to give to the poor, so we can go steal from other people.
Although I think the portrayal in Sir Walter Scott, Ivanhoe, that's the stealing from the rich and giving to the poor is the thing you heard on Bugs Bunny cartoons when Robin Hood was a character. Whereas it's in there, but it's very much in Scott. It's very much in the service of explicitly in the service of justice of reclaiming what has been stolen.
Yeah.
So I think Robin Hood is okay on this count.
Well, and I was joking about the red-blooded Americans thing, but yes, I think that's part of our kind of national story, the history that we're taught. But also, as we grow older and we question that history, where I have philosophically landed is that it is right to do the thing that is restoring the right ordered relationship between man and God. That is freedom. That is what we hold dear.
And certainly in Robin Hood,
And so,
there's a
the end
disordering.
of tyranny.
Yeah, the
Tyranny
end of tyranny.
is disorder.
Any examples of disordered piety in literature? Is
Gosh, there's
it
probably a whole
always
bunch of those.
Yeah.
But we don't read those books, do we?
is it always portrayed positively?
Well, I think there's a lot of impiety. If we're accepting piety towards fellow human beings, there's a lot of impiety going on in Anna Karenina.
Yeah.
That jumped to mind.
That's right.
With her, like, it's between her and her husband, right?
So yeah, I think Levin, he's not a perfectly pious man either. I think that's part of the goal of the book is towards you like you're looking and maybe disagreeing.
No.
But
Keep going.
but it's towards his piety. So he's imperfectly pious. There is, I think, a devotion that is unique to him that he has to Kitty. That is certainly a better form of piety than Anna and Vronsky have, but it's not yet perfected, and that requires what will happen later in the book.
Yeah, there's this gravitational thing in Anna Karenina where Anna is pulled by Vronsky into impiety, and Levin is pulled by Kitty into piety.
I think so.
And it was just the beauty of the book.
Yeah. I think Jane Eyre is another place where I don't think I'm not necessarily giving an example of disordered piety, because that's an interesting thought. I don't know if I'm prepared to answer that, but I think Jane Eyre demonstrates the difficulty of piety by pretty powerful means. I mean, she chooses to leave Rochester.
In quite a sweeping speech, her monologue is beautiful.
That's
when
right.
She says, I can't.
Yes,
I love God.
Because of her piety to God.
Yeah.
And it requires other things for resolution. It requires divine help in that sense to be resolved.
Right.
I do feel that there is some point to be made in Beowulf about piety, but it's been too long since I've read it that I can't make the point. But I have this niggling feeling in the back of my head.
That's right.
Honorable mention.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I feel the same way about Sir Gawain, because I know there's a test and it's involves some possible impropriety that could lead to impiety. So,
Is this a hard virtue to teach to students if you find it in literature?
It's a hard one for us to define.
I know. But I'm thinking, Paul, of your example that you've shared before on this show when you were explaining to your students about Dido. And I think that's a wonderful example about just explaining to students maybe what they think something is versus the outworkings of it.
Well, and what was interesting in that conversation was it was very much, I mean, they were just appalled. Well, the student that raised the question, she was just taken with how much Dido loved Aeneas that she would jump on a funeral pyre once he left. Yeah. And I was like, this is not what love is.
Right. That's exactly.
And so
in fact, that might be that's a disordered passion.
Yes. And just needing to help them understand the hierarchy of things, of that, yes, it is right for Aeneas to leave Dido at the command of the gods, right? And there's stories all throughout Scripture of where you're like, well, that person got hurt but God told the other person to do it, you know. And so it was an act on that other person of piety to do what he was commanded to do. And so, I mean, it is something that has to be explicitly pointed out to students again and again and again of like, there's a freedom in being pious, but that means that you're always submitting to the legitimate authority above you.
It also seems to me that the beauty of literature is you don't have to necessarily pull it out and call attention to the particular thing and define it for them, because it's just it's imbibed implicitly in the story. They recognize it. They recognize that as the thing that we want to use this label on. If you do pull it out, but they still got it. They still they weren't taught it necessarily. They don't have to be taught it, but it gets caught.
You're categorizing what's already emerged.
Yeah, you're categorizing you're giving a name to something that they already know. I think, which again is the beauty of literature. Literature teaches things very undidactically. It goes straight for your soul in a way that a philosophical treatise on it doesn't.
Ian, I'll put you on the spot here. I thought we should mention Aslan in the Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh, sure.
But it's been too long since.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you have the Christ figure in Aslan throughout, and he's of course demonstrating his inherent piety and the fact that he is, he calls his father the Emperor of the Sea, and of course there's not an exact. It's all allegory and metaphor. We can't extrapolate these things out to be an exact representation of who Jesus is to the Father and so on. But Aslan is about the business of the Emperor of the Sea, about the business of his father, and he brings the children in to be about the business of Aslan, bringing life back to a dead land and demonstrating his own piety and giving of himself in love for others. I mean, it's the Christ story is what it is. And then I think probably in every Narnian book, you see some example of piety, of growth in piety, of, maybe it's a journey and something like The Horse and His Boy, and learning to understand who your proper obedience is towards. In the instance of The Horse and His Boy, they have to learn it is to Aslan, or it is to the king of in the case of Shasta, it's his true father, the king that he didn't know. And so I think Narnia is just full of it. So much full of it that you might not be able to isolate it down. And I think something that you were talking about that I wanted to bring up is that literature is a perfect example of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
If you're looking at piety and you're trying to say piety is this, well, that's what a philosophical treatise does. But literature gives you this picture, this image, this tapestry. And you might be able to say, this looks like piety, this feels like piety, but it's beyond that. It's bigger than that. And piety is there, essentially.
Right. Well, and I was thinking about that with our primary text, right? Because I couldn't come up with good examples in the primary text of where this is shown. Yeah. But it's all an ethos that's throughout, right? Yeah. That there is an order to the world, that you submit to the authorities above you, that you do have a respect. It's not a begrudging, thing, but that happiness comes out of that virtue.
Well, in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's the difference between the deep magic and the deeper magic. The witch knew only so much of the order of reality, but Aslan knew the real order and reestablished it. And that was an example of piety.
Well, and on the issue, what you start out with there on literature, I see these schools with character education programs, and they have a list of virtues,
right?
And they define the virtues, right? And they maybe give a single example of the virtue being performed. But it's like, why don't you just teach literature?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
And carefully curated literature.
Sure,
that's right. Because so much of just the environment we live in, our culture, is telling us that you can order things however you want, and you're the authority, or your duty is to yourself and how you feel like things should go, instead of a clear structure where you're coming underneath the authority of someone else. You're submitting yourself to a system or a person. Very countercultural, this virtue, at least to our modern experience.
I think so.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the discussion. I did learn more. And I think maybe Paul.
Maybe I learned more. We all have to go do some research.
We all are. Oh, wonderful. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. Thanks for coming back, Ian. Glad to have you. And thank you for joining us, too. We'll be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.